Hi everyone, I'm Amy Lee Miller, and today I want to talk more about the scariest thing in the world, telling the truth. Why is honesty often the hardest thing we can do? Well, scary things sometimes happen when we speak up and tell the truth. In some countries, loss of life. In some family and friend circles, we can get ostracized. We could get fired from our jobs. Divorce sometimes happens when we stand up and say, I'm not happy. We have things to work on. Oftentimes, we're put through similar situations that keep showing up in different ways throughout our lives until we're ready to learn and grow. And we're not always learning at the same time. So how do we resolve the issue when the people we may need to talk through it with are not ready to join us in being honest? We resolve it by looking within, by resolving the issue within ourselves. And sometimes that means walking away from people or situations that are no longer helping us grow. So yeah, being honest is often very difficult, but what is the alternative? We often hear people who are close to death share that the only regrets they have are the things that they didn't try. We can take a lesson from that now while we're living by listening to that little voice inside of us trying to speak up and say, hey, there's a problem that needs attention. There's something more that I want for myself. What happens when we keep ignoring that is that eventually the universe is going to step in and force a change with what is often a very painful event. But that's okay, it's necessary and it helps us grow. And while yes, sometimes life is very painful, we are meant to be happy. We are here to learn and grow, and we do deserve happiness, but we won't get there by ignoring our problems. And it's not our job to change others, but it is our duty to look out for each other and ourselves. And we do this by honoring and accepting ourselves, by being honest. How else can we help each other grow? If we're too afraid to speak up, to stand up and say something, to say, hey, this is bothering me, I don't like what's going on here, we need to change, we need to work on this. When we're too afraid to do that, we are enabling that other person to remain stagnant. We all know some married couples, for example, or maybe not married, just couples who are unhappy and they stay together, yet they're not working on the problems. So why would they be doing that? Because working on it is hard. When we're brave enough to look at the issue, we become face to face with that big uncomfortable problem. And if it weren't so uncomfortable, it wouldn't be a problem. I know a couple who loved and were faithful to each other for years. However, they had a problem that they were never willing to look at and resolve. And so they never did. But they did stay together, sometimes living under the same roof, not communicating, not speaking. How is this lack of communication, lack of working on the issue, promoting any growth? Well, it's not, and it didn't. And so what happens when we're not learning from our chat, when we're not learning our lessons and growing, is the same problem will keep showing up and sometimes get bigger and bigger and bigger until we do something about it. So what happened with this couple is suddenly the husband became very ill and he was gone within 1 week. And now the wife is left with an opportunity to make some changes, to begin looking at the issues in her life and start to handle things a little bit differently. And sometimes what happens is we are ready to acknowledge the issue, and the universe doesn't have to step in with a big painful event. The universe is actually stepping in all along the way by giving us hints that we're unhappy. And then finally, maybe one day we get tired enough and we're ready to do something about whatever the issue is in our lives that is bothering us. Maybe it's our weight, a job that we don't like. Maybe we continue finding ourselves in dysfunctional relationships. Maybe for some reason we continue getting walked on by our friends or family. And when we're finally ready to look at the issue, that's when we make change. Here's the good news. The more we get used to listening to our feelings, paying attention, noticing when something is bothering us, the easier it becomes for us to make change, because we can then let the universe guide us to the next step, which is going to lead us toward greater happiness. And eventually it becomes easy and we don't have to stay uncomfortable for as long. I have so many examples of this throughout my life, and I used to be very unhappy, and I would often stay in situations where I felt miserable for months, years, sometimes decades, until I would get sick enough of it that I was ready to make a change. One of these very pivotal points in my past is what got me started finally down my sales career path, whereas before that, for several years before that, I had struggled to find a meaningful job that I felt good about. Another one of those times was when I finally moved to New York, whereas before that point, I had lived my life always feeling disconnected and like I didn't belong. And I had friends and relationships, but they just weren't fulfilling. And so I always found myself feeling alone, whether I was around other people or not. And that changed for me when I finally listened to my intuition and honored it by moving to an environment that was better for me. And another example was when I finally noticed how unhappy I was at the time in my job. And I liked my job, but one day I noticed how irritated I was, and it finally got enough to the point where I decided I was ready to go into business for myself. At the time, it felt like my unhappiness just snuck up on me and was suddenly there out of nowhere. But looking back, I noticed the universe had been hinting at me for a long time that I was ready to grow beyond that role by going into business for myself because I was irritated all the time. So when I decided to make that transition, you know, the idea popped into my head to go into business for myself, and I made it happen. 3 weeks later, it was done. I had started. I was able to make that transition so quickly because I had been putting this practice into play for years, of really starting to pay attention when I felt unhappy and understanding that there was a reason for that, and then listening to my intuition to let it guide me to that next step toward greater happiness. So here's the point. When we're feeling uncomfortable, it is for a very important reason. Discomfort is a tool propelling us to greater happiness in our lives, to the greater things that are meant for us. My grandfather has often said, Amy, you're not happy being unhappy. And thank goodness. If we're happy being unhappy, we will always stay right where we are. So if you're unhappy in any area of your life, get excited because that means change is coming. Positive changes are coming for you. The great things that are meant for you in your life are coming. How awesome is that? And it doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but that's okay. However, it does get easier the more we get used to listening to ourselves, paying attention when something is not sitting quite right. We can more easily and more quickly follow the signs the universe is giving us, guiding us on our path toward greater happiness. I believe we live many lifetimes, but this is my lifetime right now, and this is your lifetime right now. What do you want for yourself? Who do you want to be? Are you ready to be honest with yourself? And are you ready to be honest with those around you and stand up and sometimes let them know when something is not okay with you? In this way, we serve as a catalyst to help each other grow. And sometimes personal growth does mean walking away from people. But don't worry, if they are meant to be in your life, they'll be back. The opportunity will present itself. This actually happened for me just last week. People I had to walk away from to help promote my personal growth and healing because at the time it was damaging for me to keep them around. The opportunity presented itself and they're back, and we've now healed our issue and are once again close. I don't know that I ever saw that happening. Life is interesting, painful, awesome, and surprises us. We never know what's next, but when we're honest with ourselves and each other, only goodness ultimately can come from that. The more willing we are to look at our issues and work through our challenges, the easier it becomes to let the universe guide us down our path toward greater happiness. We can live a life without regret by being honest. I'm Amy Lee Miller, and I believe in you.